Hi everybody, welcome to our roundtable today. I'm Paul Donaher. I'm a Director of Client Services here at Radius, and we're delighted to have you all here with us today. The roundtable topic today will be best practices in international activation of insights. And you can see our participants here in front of you today. They are Shari Aaron. Shari is a EVP of Innovation here at Radius, Glenn Stada, who is an SVP of Client Services, and Paul Thomas. Paul is with a company called Strive, who just merged with Radius at the end of last year, and Paul is a founder of Strive. So welcome all three of you, and the roundtable today will be moderated, as always, by Barry Weinhausen, and Barry is the Director of Qualitative here at Radius. Just a reminder how we usually do things. The roundtable today will last for 45 minutes. Of that, I'll do this brief introduction. Then the team will chat for 30 minutes or so. And then that should leave us time for a Q&A at the end of about 10 minutes. If you have a question as we go through, please type those into the software as you see it in front of you. I'll be monitoring that as we go through. And at the end, if you have any questions, I'll pick out the ones that we can ask the team, and I'll ask on your behalf for the team, and they can answer at the end. So we'll take about 45 minutes. So the key issues that we will address today, hopefully you will come away with enhanced understanding of activation and 5 particular areas that we're thinking about. That's international activation across globally diverse teams. Activation when you want to infuse some local context into insights that might be created globally or centrally. We'll give you some case stories from EMEA and North America, and we'll also tell you a little bit about how AI might enhance activation. And finally, we'll also tell you about how to perhaps craft different outputs from activation sessions for different functional teams across the business. So, as way of introduction to our 3 roundtablists today, let's start with Shari. Shari, as I said, is an EVP here at Radius, and she's known for focusing on driving growth and loyalty for her clients, and she's always looking to build upon changing cultural patterns and the latest technology to help transform the way that we do insights. Shari lives with her husband in Greenwich, Connecticut. Shari is also a published author, and you can often see her walking around Greenwich with her beautiful golden retriever, Gracie. Glenn is an SVP at Radius, as I mentioned, and Glenn is based out of Princeton, New Jersey. In addition to leading a client service team, Glenn is also head of financial services unit here at Radius and brings his years of experience to clients in that sector predominantly. Glenn lives in New Jersey, in Montgomery Township, with his wife, Joella, and they love to try new restaurants and the local cuisine in any of the cities that they visit. Finally, Paul Thomas is the founder of Strive Insights. As I mentioned, we merged with Strive late last year. Paul is driven to create opportunities from knowledge and has a passion to give clients the tools they need to make things happen. Paul has 3 kids. He's a proud Welshman, and he loves his rugby and his golf. And something that I didn't know until yesterday, Paul's grandfather actually used to play drums for both Tom Jones and Shirley Bassey, 2 icons, I think you'll agree, of the music industry. So welcome all 3 of you. And Barry, take it away, please.
Fantastic, thanks, Paul. So let's dive right in. To get us started, Glenn, will you kick us off and talk a little bit about when we refer to activation, what does that even mean? What are we talking about?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Barry. Activation is essentially the usage of insights from any project or data set to inform the strategic or tactical decisions that business decision makers will make to drive their business forward. That being said, it is important to recognize that when we talk about activation, it isn't just at the end of a project. Activation happens all the way through the research project, from engagement at the front end to those that are going to be using the research all the way through execution and delivery.
Fantastic, thank you. Shari, why don't you share with us some of the key reasons why an organization may participate in activation, or ask for an activation session?
So the most compelling reason is that activation puts our insights to work much faster in an organization. We know that clients engage in marketing research because they have a business issue to solve. That's our start point. We conduct research, we share the results with the research team and internal clients, right? From there, the implications must be socialized internally throughout the client's organization, maybe with agency partners, because you need to ensure buy-in and proper implementation of the action items from the research. So that activation session, the way to think about it, it's that opportunity to help with those socialization efforts, establish priorities, and create clear action items to move forward with. Activation helps team with taking that internalizing of the so what and the now what, and it really gets your teams engaged and energized and excited to move forward. Teams that activate together have more ownership of the implementation steps to the desired outcome. So it's even more critical in today's fast-paced hybrid working environment that teams take the time to collaboratively work together, determine how the research learning impacts their business, the changes they need to make or the evolutions they need to make to drive the efficiency, and activation really helps to make sure your research investment is driving ROI for you.
Excellent, thank you. So before we dive into international activation approaches, which we will do shortly, let's start off by talking about best practices in a single country or market. And that may be different in EMEA versus the United States. So let's talk about that a little bit. Paul, please tell us what some of the best practices are for EMEA, and then we'll discuss North America as well.
No worries. I don't know if these are specific to EMEA, but I think there are certainly a number of things that make for successful activation. Yeah, I think as Glenn kind of pointed out, firstly, stakeholder engagement, right? Bringing the stakeholders on the journey with us so that activation is seen actually as a key end game and vital to sort of finishing that journey. I think there was a very interesting study done a few years ago by McKinsey that kind of highlighted that 50% of segmentations stay on the shelf, right? And the key reason for that being not bringing the company on the journey with you so they feel like they own it. And we all know how important activation is to a successful segmentation, right? Another kind of, I think, key element is clear goals for activation as well. What's the desired outcome or goal that you want to achieve? I think too many times activation workshops really just end up being glorified presentations of the findings, if you like, because there's no sort of ownership of action plans or clear plan for kind of next steps. The next thing I think is we've talked about activation being about stakeholder engagement up front and kind of at the end. In my view, activation can and should be occurring throughout the program and not just at the end, right? As soon as we start a study, we're gathering insight, right? So why can't we be acting on that as we gather it? And so there's often quick wins that can present themselves that we should be compelling our clients to act upon immediately rather than waiting to the very, very end where we might have missed an opportunity, right? Finally, inspiring outputs, okay, from both the research and the activation itself. Making our clients really want to use the material and share it wide and far, okay? Providing that real carrot for clients to make them really want to be part of an activation session and be part of activating an insight, right? It's like a good advert for activation, if you like. So using techniques like narrative design, journalistic storytelling, using the frameworks like the pyramid principle and so on, to communicate really clear, compelling opportunities that our clients are really itching to follow through on.
Fantastic, that's a great perspective. Glenn, why don't you speak to some of the best practices for activation in North America?
Sure, yeah, similar to what Paul mentioned, maybe they end up getting delivered or executed differently upon in North America. Definitely at the start of a project, some of the best practices we see is actually building in activation in that research plan. So don't just write an RFP, a proposal, a schedule that takes you through the presentation that doesn't have activation built in and steps for activation along the way. Some other things I think Paul mentioned it, but building engagement and buzz. I think we do pretty good marketing ourselves, marketing the results from our studies in terms of externally, but not internally. So within client organizations, I've seen PR campaigns set up around certain studies, around brand tracking studies, around segmentations, where we create a logo attached to that study. We brand the study. As Paul mentioned, it doesn't have to be waiting until the end to share results. We've come up with drip campaigns where every 2 to 3 weeks, we're sending out emails really high level about an interesting fact or finding, getting excitement and buzz about the research. Going back to the front, the stakeholder interviews that I think we all believe are a critical part of activation. What we have seen work well is actually ask the stakeholders to come into those sessions with some hypotheses that they have about what we're going to learn, essentially articulate what they want us to prove or disprove, and then also answer questions that we may have in terms of what would you like to do with this research? Ultimately, how do you see this research impacting your business, your brand? By having a clear articulation of that, we can build those elements into the activation on the back end. And then just real quick, the back end workshops, using templates, as Paul mentioned, pyramid principle. Just don't have them be a half-day workshop of presenting results and talk about the results, but actually have some activities for the stakeholders to do. Last thing that we find very helpful, or we've seen it be successful for our clients, is they set and name an internal research champion at the research organization. So it's their job to be checking in with their colleagues 6 months, 9 months, a year out to get a sense of what the research has been doing for them and how they're using it. So all those things have been best practices for North America.
Excellent. Now let's bring all of that together. So we've heard a little bit about North America, we've heard a little bit about EMEA, but when it comes actually to international, on an international scale, Paul, can you tell us what are some of the best practices when you are working with multiple countries across time zones, across locations?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things is about being able to sort of balance the needs of sort of global versus local, if you like, and kind of ensuring that each gets what it wants. Yeah. So making sure we're kind of serving all of our masters, whether they be at the sort of the sort of overall brand level versus the individual kind of market level. Another thing is about engaging each of the regions as well, especially, and we've all been there, where there might be a sort of a them versus us feeling towards a kind of a global view, and that really means spending time understanding the specific needs of each market or the issues that they have, kind of either in person and directly with each of the kind of markets or region, or through some sort of remote mechanism, kind of if a client is reluctant to bring the regions in directly. The third thing I think it is about demonstrating clear understanding of the different markets, their dynamics, their cultures, their oddities, right? Ideally through things like kind of local immersion, but really what I call kind of tasting the market and living the environment. So any activation we know is really grounded in the understanding of the implications of that in each market, right? The markets are very, very different. The final thing for me is about ensuring that your activation approach and resulting sessions or exercises or whatever are geared to deliver the global strategy, but as I said, is also tailored to answer the key issues that each market has as well. That's for me is where you get kind of buy-in then, true buy-in and true adoption of activation at both the sort of overall and the individual market level.
Let me dig in a little bit further on that with you, Paul. What does it look like when you're activating insights across multiple geographies with geographically dispersed teams? So we've talked a little bit about different regions, different locations, but what does that actually come out looking like?
Look, kind of as I said, it's often involving different market dynamics, different cultures, most importantly, probably different communication styles as well. So tailoring is really vital. I don't think it's a one size fits all in terms of, you know, individual regions or geographies. Like, yeah, how you'd run an activation session, for example, in the US versus somewhere like South Korea, so would be very, very different, because they demand very different communication styles because of culture. You know, in one, you can start top down from the answer and work backwards. And in the other, you've got to kind of drive, for example, kind of bottom up and almost lead them to the answer. So again, tailoring is really key. Second thing is really then, it's really vital to know your audience, their backgrounds, hierarchies that may exist in, you know, in the room, especially that are culturally driven. And that's really, really important in how you need to adapt exercises because of that as well. Because culturally, the dynamics in an activation session can be very different across markets. And the final thing is you can be dealing with cultures where English is not the first language. So again, you need to tailor your outputs, your visual communications, your materials, and indeed even your kind of activation exercises to be sensitive to this. So making sure that everything is clearly understood and nothing gets lost in translation. So I suppose overall, it's all about tailoring for me.
Great, thank you. One thing I heard from you all as we kicked off was about the importance of getting buy-in, and it sounds like it is key to success. I wonder how easy or difficult it is to get that buy-in. Glenn, what are some of your approaches for getting that international buy-in across teams?
Yes, it could be difficult. Definitely for those local market folks that, you know, may be disconnected from the central globally managed, you know, office or whatever, the buying center for the research. What we have found that works best is really leveraging a very senior person within the client's organization to set that expectation that buy-in centrally and within the markets is critical. It will help them to grow their business. There's a benefit for them to participate, and there's an expectation that they're going to participate. Often we will help to craft an email or a letter that gets then sent by the executive to the markets that essentially helps to you know, tee up that participation. Then a lot of the stuff that Paul mentioned, make the local market folks feel that we are understanding their local situation, their local culture. Ask them up front, you know, some of the questions that we were talking about earlier about what you're looking to get out of this. What should we know about your business? Make sure they see us asking those questions. Sometimes we'll offer, and we have to be careful about this so we don't go too far afield from the SPEXA study, but sometimes we'll offer, once we have a survey written, to have one person in each market review it to make sure we've got the languaging right, we've got the competitive brands right, we're not asking questions in a way that are culturally insensitive. So just asking them to participate up front and helping us to get the survey instrument in place will help get that buy-in and that participation on the back end when we've got results ready to walk through.
All right, so let me continue with you, Glenn, if I may. So once you get that buy-in, when it comes to the actual activation workshops, what client dynamics need to be considered to help ensure success?
Sure. Yeah, it's really important to know which of the internal departments have a stake in the research, could be impacted by the results, could benefit by actions that will be taken. So knowing on a certain project, if it's segmentation, you may want marketing strategy people involved, you may want line of business people involved, you may want communications or messaging people involved, maybe R&D if we think there may be a need to develop new products around certain segments. So really understanding who should have a seat at the table, that's critical. And then also, as you're thinking about what that activation session should look like to get the most out of it, you really need to think about your company culture. Is it a culture where people share easily and we know we're going to have a lot of participation? Is it a culture where sometimes it's harder to get people to speak up, and there may be a way to then build exercises that kind of, you know, address that barrier? Is it a culture that loves lunch and learns, you know, build it around a lunch and learn? So really just understanding the dynamics of your culture, how people interact with each other, and build those in so the activation experience is comfortable.
That all makes good sense. Thanks, Glenn. So Shari, how might that differ for different strategic issues or needs? So in other words, when you think about Radius as brand growth navigator, are there specific strategic issues or needs that would prompt a different design or approach to activation?
Sure. So when we talk about the brand growth navigator, we're referring to those key areas that drive business growth. That could include communications or targeting strategies. It could be around innovation or customer journey, right? So as you think about determining how to build the best activation program across these key growth areas, it's important to realize that you should be thinking about building these around a variety of activities and experiences. Don't think about activation as a one-size-fits-all approach. Rather, and as Paul and as Glenn has been saying, tailor the activation program. So I'll give you a for instance. If you're looking to build the right communication strategy, then the activation plan should be built around collaboration on developing the most actionable and impactful creative brief, and maybe include your agency partners in that process. Let's say your work is focused on the consumer journey or on the shopper's side of the business, right? You want the activation plan to include building those retailer sell stories as the outcome, right? Or the retailer playbooks. You may even want to consider adding a retailer partner in with your activation. So you need to start with the goal in mind and what you want to implement, and then work backwards and build out the activation program that's going to more quickly enable your team to reach their goals.
Got it. And then the other side of the coin, of course, there are some times when folks choose not to do an activation phase to a research initiative. Paul, what have you been finding in terms of reasons why a client might choose to skip an activation?
Well, look, budget is obviously an obvious one, right? And but actually, I'd argue that the activation is vital to get the insights kind of pushed through in the business, right? So I'd flip that around and say, look, the onus is on us, right? So we need to be thinking about how we can cost effectively deliver some form of activation without it being the sort of Ferrari model that we'd all love to do, but you know, not all clients can afford. So can we create simple, engaging tools that clients can use for internal activation, whether that be, you know, simple frameworks, short, impactful videos, you know, kind of a collaboration forum that can be used for asynchronous activation and so on, rather than these huge kind of, you know, in-person workshop programs across multiple countries. So kind of, as I said, it's about us understanding what budget is available and tailoring effectively kind of towards that, because as I said, activation is vital.
So with that all said, how do you speak to clients? How do you suggest that clients think about their research budget and maybe allocating a certain percentage of that towards activation?
A certain percentage, I don't think that's not necessarily the sort of the right question. I think if you know, kind of as I say, if budget is a problem, then we need to work out some simple tools that can be used where the budget, you know, restricts a full Monty. So again, I just reiterate, it's about being creative to make sure the client can achieve activation. Not say that we can't do it because they can only devote, for example, 10% of a small budget to it. I think, you know, the other thing could be said of time, right? We've had, you know, clients say, oh, well, you know, that we can't do activation because there's sort of time involved in sort of getting everybody together and so on. You know, in that instance, we need to create some form of FOMO or so on, right? To make it sort of almost make them fear of missing out if they're not involved in, you know, an activation, like kind of Glenn said, creating so much buzz about it, really engaging the stakeholders in it so that they almost they can't wait to get through that door in terms of, in terms of activation. Because if you do that, you'd be surprised how many clients will free up time in their diaries for it.
Got it. Thank you. So despite best efforts, Sherry, what happens if a client does decide to forego activation? Maybe they say that they're going to do it themselves. What are some of the pitfalls that they might encounter if they should go that route?
Yeah, I think, the bottom line is they're not going to feel the same impact, right? You don't get that collective team to contribute their thinking within the larger group. And honestly, clients have said to us they feel remorse. They have expressed to us, we're sorry we didn't bake it in. What happens is people go back to old habits, right? So the company hasn't gained alignment or understanding from the work that they invested in. So you get backsliding, you're spending more time rehashing, you have more meetings, you go around in circles, right? These are like those time wasters, and they drive down the efficiency and they cause frustration for doing the work. So, getting back to what Paul was talking about, like it's important to think about the cost of not doing activation. When you're looking at the full cost of the research and the smaller component that activation provides, you weigh that against the inefficiencies of not getting everybody together on the same page. Each person brings their point of view, their unique hat, their diversity of thinking, their skill set, and you collectively come up with implementation and you make people commit to actions. And if that doesn't happen in your activation session because you don't have budget for it, then you could be spending more time socializing and more meetings and not making the progress you need to make.
All right, well, this all sounds great and helpful and informative, but what really might bring it to life is an actual case study. So Sherry, will you share an example of an international activation session that you've been a part of? We'd love to hear how it went, what the outcomes were, the various stakeholders, and how it all came together.
Yeah, so I'll give a particular example. This one had 4 countries, different time zones, and the project involved global innovation and strategic growth for the company. So what we did is we had teams developed based on where they were located on their time zones, and we provided these teams with themes and activities to complete on their own. And we named this the climbing of Mount Everest, right? So everybody had this goal of we're going to climb Mount Everest, and within our teams, we're going to make it all the way to the top of Mount Everest. So everybody started at base camp. They understood the goals of working together to ensure that all the climbers made it up to the top of Mount Everest together. We created challenges building upon the learning of the research that needed to be accomplished at each level, including getting to the top where those final goals, they had to reach their final goals and shared collectively as they reached the top. So each country worked at their own pace and within their own cultural norms. And then we as Radius compiled the learning across those 4 different countries and showed where there were similarities, where there were differences, and the nuances by country, right? So this enabled the team in each of the countries to really stay engaged. It had deep collaboration throughout the process. It enabled us to move from the learnings to the implementation and to efficiently accomplish them. And each country's needs were met, as well as us providing a global roll-up.
Perfect. Thank you. That makes good sense. So let's talk a little bit about AI and the role that AI might play in activation. So Paul, tell me a little bit about how you see AI enhancing the activation of research findings. I'm actually going to go around to everybody. So everybody put on your thinking caps. We're just going to start with Paul here.
No, I think one enhancement we're seeing is AI allowing us to activate across a greater breadth of sources of insight. That's not new for AI, right? But it's bringing what we think are richer and deeper insights, right? And so giving us richer and deeper activation direction. I'd give an example. We're currently using AI to reactivate a huge raft of a big UK telecoms clients' existing research and their internal data, public social data, and so on. And it's all about delivering forward-thinking future trend identification. So trying to identify things almost 6, 9, 12 months kind of in advance. So our clients can kind of act on them and develop and build for them now. So yeah, AI for us is doing the kind of assisted learning across all these sorts of insights, sources of insights, to predict the consumer insights, right, and the consumer issues that they need to be tackling and thinking about in the next 6 months. the value in AI in this context is it can allow us to collide so much, and that means, as I said, the trends are richer, deeper, more actionable than before. So that means we're delivering clearer, more tangible opportunities onto the radar of these kind of senior commercial business decision makers, so they can pre-plan accordingly and kind of be ahead of the game. So it's allowing us to kind of bring more to the table, make it richer, make it more predictive, and so put our clients kind of on the front foot.
Perfect, thank you. Shari, what do you have to add?
So I would add that you could incorporate tools like Midjourney or DALL-E right into your activation session. And these would allow you to inspire and deepen the learning. And you could use it so for instance, pamper yourself. That was a big theme that we were trying to have everybody understand and played a role in the activation. And when you put into DALL-E this idea of pampering yourself, it brings something to life that shows an image. So we're not saying go forward with that image, that's your communication image, right? But it gave us a tagline, it gave us a look and a feel. It helped deepen our understanding of what pampering yourself actually meant, which I don't think we would have gotten to without some form of illustration, collective building in the group. So it's a lot about inspiring and using these tools to add on rather than replacing the work that we're doing in that session.
Got it. And Glenn, what do you have in terms of last thoughts on AI as far as activation goes?
Yeah, I agree with Paul and Shari in terms of the uses of AI, bringing in just more, breadth of additional insights and learnings to apply along with what we've learned maybe from a survey, what we know in other places. The one thing I do want to caution and where I see AI not being used is in that, okay, so what do we do? Essentially the stakeholders in the activation session are the ones that know their business the best. They're the ones that should be making the decision. It should be the humans that are driving the activation, but leveraging AI to help with the breadth of insights that we have to be able to support those decisions.
Great. And so as we begin to wrap up, Glenn, I'm hoping you can kind of give us a summary as we start to conclude our conversation in terms of how you frame all of this in a meaningful and compelling way for your clients.
Yeah, I essentially link it to return on research investment. So, activation, essentially means a better return on the research investment for the organization because it's a tool and a really useful and proven tool to help them optimally use the results that they're getting from the research to drive those business results. So again, I link it to return on research investment, and it tends to make a lot of sense, when we talk about it in those terms.
Makes sense to me. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. I'm actually going to open this up to Paul. He may have some questions from our observers today.
I do. Lots of questions, folks. Thank you for that, for those good insights and for those good comments. A lot of questions come into the software. As usual, I'll try and get to all of them, but I might combine a few. Lots of questions about creativity. We loved your Mount Everest example, Shari, but I think what's coming through is having fun exercises, make this fun for people to be part of. And do you have, what are your, I guess one of the ways to phrase this would be, do you have a favorite fun exercise that you have used in the past, one that you could recommend that we as a group think about in the future? I'll throw that open to anybody who happens to have a fun one top of mind.
Yeah, I've got something as it relates to segmentation studies where, the activation is about understanding the segment, bringing them to life, and then thinking about a strategy to put against them. We've hired actors to assume the personas of each segment and act out and create a character based on the personification, essentially answer questions from the stakeholders as that persona. Another fun thing is if it is a segment and a category that lends to physical products, buy the products and bring them to the work session in terms of these are the products that this person uses. So really just bringing that person, that persona to life. And that's typically something that stakeholders love.
Yeah, we've done some. You go ahead, Sher.
So I would just add on to what Glenn was saying, that you can also bring in not only actors, but also bring in consumers. Like if you want to pick the right consumers and have them do pre-work. But there's nothing more inspirational than when your clients are talking directly to your end consumer in the activation session. So bringing them in for a small part or bringing the actors in, I think really livens up the ability to internalize, right? It's about internalizing the learning in a collective environment. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Paul.
I think added to that a couple of things. I think, Glenn, you talked about bringing actors in to play segments, yeah? What we've done in the past is tasked our clients to go out and play those segments in retail and so on, right? Which is eye-opening for us, because do they understand the segment? Can they be the segment? And also eye-opening for them in terms of how they get treated as the segment when they're in retail. Another thing we take our clients on safaris as well, right? So if we're working with a client potentially, say, in a premium category or so on, we might take them into other categories, into stores. So, we'll take them into Fortnum and Mason in London, right? And get them involved, looking at how premium is displayed in there in terms of the products and so on. And, this might be a cell phone manufacturer, for example, but taking them into these different environments to generate ideas and create kind of learning and so on. Some of the other techniques kind of similar that we would use.
Excellent. Good ideas there. I appreciate it. This one comes in. They asked me not to mention their name, and you'll see why in a second. And this isn't quite international, but it's activation in general, and I think we'll all appreciate the question. So this business has a disconnect between the marketing team and the market research team. And they're always trying to be involved in activation, but don't necessarily have a seat at the table. And so it's the idea that they're trying to elevate themselves and make sure market research is involved, not just in the generation of insights and then giving them out to the organization, but then being involved in how the organization activates against them. Any best practices or tips and tricks to try and bridge that gap where there might be something that market research could do to bridge that gap to marketing?
I suppose, I'll start. I think there's as you say, we've all been there, right? Where you're working in organisations where things are siloed and so on, and I've got my data and you've got your data and so on. Yeah, I think one of the things is there's culture, and there needs to be a directive from the top, in terms of how important the voice of the consumer is in the sort of success of the organisation. Kind of coming in completely kind of an opposite direction is how can we help the sort of the research or insight division demonstrate things like kind of little quick wins and so on, that can just be little examples of what can happen and what things market research can help kind of answer and activate against, rather than trying to muscle in and kind of and try and be kind of everything to everybody. You know what I mean? It's just demonstrate those little benefits that market research can deliver.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. It's crystallizing the insight, right? We as market researchers sometimes devalue how much that insight matters. So we can help the market researcher crystallize the insight and how that drives the action in marketing, and either find examples from other companies that we could share or help them really drive that connection so that they're seen as valuable. And this takes time. It takes time to break down silos. It takes time to work in new ways. We're all busy. The hybrid environment makes it more challenging. So I think, you have to work at it from many different angles. There's not going to be one easy answer to life's biggest challenge of getting, two groups to work together. But the value of not having the right insight, a lot of times, we see marketing now wanting to do more consumer closeness, going home, get closer to the consumer, right? Because they want to be more actionable. And I think that's where the researcher could really step it up and find ways to add value to the process.
Good. Let me ask one last one that I have here, and this is around when to check back in on the activation. So you've run your activation session, action plans are created, outputs are created. Is it incumbent upon the research team and their partners, like Radius, to go back after a period of time and check in to make sure that the action plans are still true to the insights? And if so, do we have a best practices around what the cadence for that might be?
I think it depends on the category and the business and how fast moving that business is. I definitely think the researcher helps themselves by staying in communication, and potentially it answers that previous question. Stay involved, keep in front of your stakeholders, your marketing team. Checking in on a 3-month cadence could make sense. Also, that idea of setting one stakeholder who's going to be that internal champion, create kind of an ongoing dialogue between research and that one research champion as the conduit to what the team is doing. That could be helpful as well.
I think also, we talked about stakeholder engagement and bringing them along in the journey and so on. Hopefully through that, you'll develop a deep relationship with the client, right? And it's natural to carry on that relationship, right? So for me, it's not necessarily, well, how long do I wait until I pick up the phone? It's like, well, I'm engaged in their organization and so on. So it's almost keeping a constant understanding of what's happening, because they might develop as they start activating against an insight and developing a proposition or a program. They might need some extra answers from the research. You might need to cut the data a different way to because they're going to come up against challenges again. So it's almost making sure that we are constantly helping them feed the activation as it is developed into the opportunity and into the proposition and so on. So I feel it's almost needs to be ongoing.
Good stuff. Folks, that's all the questions. Thanks everybody for attending. Thanks for your questions. Also, thank you team here for your time and your input here. We'll be back with another webinar or roundtable in 3 months or so. In the meantime, thanks everybody for your contributions and for your questions and for your attendance today. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.